the largest land mammal that scientists have ever found. It is a story of bones scattered across mountains and deserts. You will ask why such size evolves and why it sometimes disappears. And you will keep one simple question in mind from start to finish. How did a 20-ton hornless rhino cousin rise to rule its world, and why did it vanish? The ground shakes and leaves fall as an animal higher than a 2-story house passes through a sparse woodland. At the shoulder, it stands about 15 to 16 feet high, roughly 4.5 to almost 5 meters. The neck lifts a heavy skull toward treetops. The mouth reaches far into branches that no other animal on the ground can touch. This is Paraceratherium. It is not a dinosaur. It is a mammal, a relative of rhinoceroses, but without a horn. Some individuals likely weighed 15 to 20 tons, and the very largest estimates reach higher than that. That is 3 to 5 African elephants combined. It is 2 to 3 times the mass of a large Tyrannosaurus rex, even though Tyrannosaurus rex lived much earlier in the Cretaceous period and never met this giant. What kind of world could support such a creature? What kind of daily life would keep a body this big going from sunrise to sunset? And why did this body plan thrive for millions of years and then end? To answer that, start with the bones and the people who found them. In 1846, a British officer in colonial India, in what is now Pakistan, walked in the Dera Bugti hills in Balochistan and came upon large fossil bones. They were strange. They did not match known animals of that time. For years these bones sat in collections, labeled and relabeled, as people tried to make sense of them. Early fossils often confuse researchers. There is not much context. There are not enough pieces. You can hold a jaw, a tooth, or a limb and still not know the creature's shape. In the early 1900s, Guy Ellcock Pilgrim, a geologist and paleontologist, led expeditions back to the Balochistan sites. He found more material, including parts of a skull and jaw. In 1908, he used a name that fit the knowledge of that moment. He called the animal Paraceratherium bugtiense, which means hornless beast from Bugti. Paraceratherium was a known genus of hornless fossil rhinoceros. Pilgrim saw a connection and used the closest category that made sense. He did not yet realize how different his animal truly was. A few years later in 1910, Clive Forster-Cooper studied more fossils from the same area. He compared the shape of the lower jaw and teeth with known rhinos and saw something new. The differences were strong enough that the animal needed its own genus. He introduced the name Paraceratherium, which means near the hornless beast. The name shows both closeness and distance. Paraceratherium is related to other hornless rhinos, but it is not the same. That step in naming matters. It tells other scientists to look again, to measure again, and to think on a bigger scale. As word spread, expeditions looked across Asia. Each year more bones appeared. In Kazakhstan, near the Aral Sea, Russian paleontologists uncovered a nearly complete skeleton of a very large mammal. The skull was missing, but much of the body remained. In 1922, Aleksei Borissiak described this skeleton and gave it a new name, Indricotherium, after the Indrik, a giant beast in Russian folklore. Now there were different names for bones that looked very similar. Communication was slow. Teams could not easily compare all their finds. Along with Paraceratherium and Indricotherium, other names entered the record, including Balochistan after Balochistan and Dzungariotherium after Dzungaria. Each new site and each new researcher sometimes used a different label. Was this one giant species spread across a huge range? Or were there many giant species that looked much alike? For decades, the puzzle sat on museum shelves in wooden drawers that held jaws, teeth, vertebrae, ribs, and limb bones. Meanwhile, the American Museum of Natural History in New York sent Roy Chapman Andrews to the Gobi Desert of Mongolia. Those expeditions in the 1920s searched for many things. They found the first dinosaur eggs. They also found skulls, jaws, and leg bones of huge rhino-like mammals. Paraceratherium was there in number. Roy Chapman Andrews wrote about places where fragments of large bones were scattered across ravines. It was as if the bones of giants were everywhere. In 1922, his team discovered a nearly complete skull of the giant that many then called Balochistan. In 1925, they found 4 massive leg bones standing upright, still in place, as if the animal had died in mud or quicksand, and the heavy limbs stayed where they were while the rest of the body decayed. The picture of Roy Chapman Andrews and Walter Granger standing next to those 4 pillar-like bones became famous. Those columns of bone showed just how long and strong the legs were. They also gave a clear sense of height. By the late 20th century, with more fossils in more museums and better ways to compare them, paleontologists began to clean up the names. In 1989, Spencer Lucas and J. Sobus reviewed the evidence. They concluded that almost all of the different names referred to the same genus. They used Paraceratherium, the earliest and therefore the correct name under scientific rules. They recognized a small number of species within that genus, including Paraceratherium bugtiens and Paraceratherium transuraliscum, among others. That decision did not make the bones any less interesting, but it did make the conversation clearer. When paleontologists talk about Paraceratherium, they are now talking about the giant hornless rhinos of the Oligocene in a consistent way. Even after that cleanup, new finds continued. In the Linxia region of Gansu, China, a team that included Tao Deng described a remarkably well-preserved skull in 2021. The new species received the name Paraceratherium Linxiense. The skull supported ideas about a short trunk or a strong upper lip, and some researchers think it may represent one of the largest forms of this animal. The work in Linxia shows that fresh bones and fresh data still appear and can adjust our picture even now. The bones tell us how Paraceratherium looked and moved. Think of a body built for height and reach rather than speed. The legs were thick and long, more like pillars than springs. Each foot had 3 broad toes. The femur, or thigh bone, could reach close to 5 feet in length. That is taller than many people. With such limbs, Paraceratherium could stand high, lift its long neck, and bring a heavy skull up to branches other animals could not reach. The backbone sloped down from the shoulders to the hips. There was no long tail to balance, like in many dinosaurs. The weight sat in the chest and shoulders. The head adds more clues. There was no horn. Many prehistoric rhinos did not have horns, so the lack of a horn is not a surprise. The nasal bones sat high and the opening for the nose was large. That suggests a flexible upper lip or a short trunk, much like a tapir. The upper jaw held tusk-like incisors that could help strip leaves or pull at bark. The molars were large and ridged, good for crushing softer leaves and twigs. Some molars were the size of a human fist. This mouth did not graze grass on the ground. It browsed high foliage. How high could it reach? With a shoulder height around 15 to 16 feet and a neck over 6 feet long, the mouth might reach as high as 25 to 26 feet from the ground when fully stretched. That is about as high as a 3-story building. In a land without giraffes, Paraceratherium filled the role of the high browser. When a tree put out new leaves, this animal could harvest them before any smaller herbivore had a chance. That is an advantage. It is also a lifestyle that depends on the presence of trees and shrubs spaced through open woodlands. The Oligocene epoch, from about 34 to 23 million years ago, fits that picture. The world was cooler and drier than earlier in the Eocene. In Eurasia, which includes Europe and Asia together, large areas of open woodland and shrubland spread out. Think of a mosaic where clumps of trees and bushes stand with grasslands between them. Paraceratherium ranged widely across this huge landscape. Fossils appear in Pakistan and Mongolia, in China, in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, and even west into places like Romania, Bulgaria and Georgia. There are reports of remains from Turkey and the Caucasus. Back then, the Himalayan mountains and the Tibetan plateau were lower than they are today. Movement between regions was easier. A giant plant-eater could follow food over long distances as seasons changed. What did a day look like for a body that weighed as much as a small truck fleet? It probably involved constant feeding. A mammal this large needs a great deal of energy every day. Many. Researchers estimate several hundred kilograms of plant material daily. That is well over 1,000 pounds of leaves and twigs. If you think about the size of the molars and the strength of the neck, this makes sense. Paraceratherium reached high, pulled branches down, and stripped them. It may have pushed over small trees to reach more leaves. In doing so, it would have shaped the ecosystem. Today, elephants act as ecosystem engineers by knocking down trees, opening gaps, and changing the flow of water and light. Paraceratherium probably did the same in Oligocene woodlands. When a herd of elephants passes through a forest today, they leave a pattern of broken branches and gaps where grass can grow. A small group of Paraceratherium likely left similar marks. But did Paraceratherium have herds? With such huge daily needs, very large herds would strip an area fast. It is more likely that these animals lived in small family groups, or that adults often traveled alone. Modern rhinos are mostly solitary. Elephants form family groups, but split and join as food changes. Paraceratherium could have had a flexible pattern where mothers defended calves and large males moved in and out of areas. If a predator approached, that size alone would be a defense. An adult, 20-ton animal is not easy prey. Still, the Oligocene had predators that could threaten the young, the weak, or the sick. Yanodon gigas, a large member of a group of meat-eaters that were not true dogs or hyenas, lived in the same regions. Entelodonts, sometimes called hell pigs, were large omnivorous animals with powerful jaws. These predators, or scavengers, could be dangerous to calves. A female Paraceratherium with tusk-like incisors and great weight could keep most dangers away, but a calf that strayed could be at risk. When you think of the emotional life of such a giant, think of slow growth and careful care. Large mammals tend to have long pregnancies and long childhoods. A female may have carried a baby for well over a year, maybe close to 2. The calf would need years to reach full size. That means low birth rates. It also means that the population cannot rebound quickly if many adults die or if food becomes scarce. How did scientists learn these details from rock? Modern methods help. High-resolution computed tomography scanning allows researchers to see inside fossil bones. When they look closely, they can see growth rings, a bit like tree rings. These rings suggest rapid growth when young and slower growth later, which matches what we know from elephants and rhinos today. Chemical studies of tooth enamel using stable isotopes can point to the kind of plants the animal ate and whether the environment was forest-like or open grassland. For Paraceratherium, isotope studies fit the picture of a browser in woodland settings. They also suggest that, at least in some places, the environment did not change too much from season to season. That would make life simpler for a high browser that needs steady supplies of leaves. There are also footprints in some localities. Wide, round impressions with hints of 3 toes tell us how the feet spread weight on soft ground. Combine footprints with leg bones and you can think about gait. The pillar-like legs say strength and stability came first. This was not a sprinter. It did not need to be. When you are 15 feet at the shoulder and weigh many tons, speed is less important than balance and reach. The head adds more questions. Did Paraceratherium have large ears to lose heat the way elephants do today? Large animals in warm, dry climates need to handle heat. Big ears act like radiators. The fossil skull does not give a firm answer because ears are soft tissue. Some researchers suggest larger ears than the modern rhino, but not as large as an elephant. Did Paraceratherium rest during the hottest hours and feed in the morning and evening? That is possible. Without soft tissue, we may never know for certain, but these ideas help us picture a daily rhythm that could make sense. The neck, about 2 meters or more in length, and the long nasal opening shape another question. Was there a short trunk like a tapir or a muscular upper lip like a black rhinoceros? The high nasal bones and the size of the opening point toward a flexible grasping structure at the front of the face. That would help pull thin branches and strip leaves. Modern tapirs and some extinct elephant relatives use such trunks. A short trunk in Paraceratherium fits the bones and the feeding style. Weight estimates vary because no full skeleton has been found. scientists piece together sizes from femurs, vertebrae, ribs and skulls of different individuals. The largest estimates reach up to 24 tons. Many scientists prefer a range of 15 to 20 tons for the biggest adults. Shoulder height of 15 to 16 feet appears often. Body length likely reached more than 24 feet. When you stand next to a model or a skeletal mount in a museum, the size feels real in a way numbers cannot fully show. Compared with living animals, Paraceratherium stands taller than the tallest elephants, which rise to about 10 to 13 feet at the shoulder. Only a few giant prehistoric elephants, such as Paleoloxodon in India, may have matched its mass, but those animals are known from fragmentary remains. Tyrannosaurus rex is often used as a comparison in popular conversations, but it lived in a different time and place and weighed around 7 to 9 tons. It is helpful to say that Paraceratherium could be 2 to 3 times heavier than a Tyrannosaurus rex, but the two never met. What other mammals shared its world? Smaller rhinoceroses with horns lived in some areas. Early relatives of elephants, like Gomphotheres and Deinotheres, walked on the same plains and woodlands. There were ancient horses, deer-like animals, early giraffe relatives, and many ruminants. Carnivores were not big cats yet. Instead, there were large hyena-like or dog-like forms that are not direct ancestors of modern species. In this company, Paraceratherium stood as the giant high-browser. No other land mammal then could reach what it could reach. No adult Paraceratherium needed to fear much. If this giant was so successful, why did it go extinct? That is one of the central mysteries. There is no single asteroid impact to point to. Humans were not around to hunt it. Instead, several changes likely worked together slowly, and over time they made life harder for a high browser that needed trees. Around 23 million years ago, at the end of the Oligocene and the start of the Miocene, global climate continued to cool. In many regions, forests gave way to more open grasslands. Grass has different chemistry than leaves. It is lower in calories and often contains silica that wears down teeth. Many later grazers evolved high-crowned teeth to handle grass. Paraceratherium had low-crowned teeth made for softer leaves and twigs. As woodlands shrank and grasslands spread, Paraceratherium would have found less of its preferred food. At the same time, new herbivores spread. Ruminants, which include early forms of cattle and deer, thrived in the changing landscapes. Early elephants with strong trunks and tusks could pull down branches and strip bark and might have changed woodlands as they moved. Paleontologist Donald Prothero has suggested that large herds of elephant relatives could have altered groves and reduced the trees that Paraceratherium needed. Whether through direct competition or by changing the structure of the forest, the presence of more varied and numerous herbivores would have challenged a specialist that required high leaves in open woodlands. There is also the slow reality of a life cycle built on size. Large animals live long and reproduce slowly. If drought hits for a few seasons, or if a disease spreads, or if migration routes close, a population can fall and not recover quickly. As numbers drop, individuals find it harder to meet and breed. Over many thousands of years, that can push a species toward extinction even without a single dramatic event. By about 23 million years ago, Paraceratherium disappears from the fossil record. The end was likely gradual. In one valley, there may have been a last mother and calf, and then no more. In another region, a lone male may have crossed a dry plain and found no partner. That is how an end often comes for a slow-breeding giant. Quietly, and then finally. Even as we talk about endings, the science continues. Modern tools reveal new details. Computed tomography slice by slice shows muscle attachments on skulls. This helps infer the strength of the lip or trunk. Studies of bone histology show growth patterns, and those studies match what we know about large mammals today. Stable isotope analysis pulls tiny clues from tooth enamel that survived for tens of millions of years. These tools support the A view that Paraceratherium preferred woodland browse. They also help show how local climates varied less from season to season in some regions. That steadiness may have helped the giant survive for so long before the broader shift toward open grasslands. Genetics also offers insight, not from Paraceratherium itself, because DNA does not last that long, but from living rhinos. By mapping the genetic branches of modern rhinoceroses, scientists infer when lineages split. The branch that led to Paraceratherium split early. Paleontologists call the group Paraceratheridae. There are no living descendants of this family. The 5 living rhinos, white, black, Indian, Javan, and Sumatran, are distant cousins in the larger rhinoceros family. This helps us place Paraceratherium on the tree of life. It is not a direct ancestor of living rhinos. It is a separate branch that grew to great size and then ended. Now pull back from the research and look at the big picture. What does Paraceratherium tell us about evolution? First, it shows that mammals can reach sizes we usually only connect with dinosaurs. That happens when the environment offers the right food at the right height and when there are not many other giants competing for the same leaves. Second, it shows that becoming large can solve some problems and create new ones. Being large reduces the danger from predators. It also makes each day a search for enormous amounts of food and water. It slows down reproduction. It makes heat control harder. Third, it shows that as the climate shifts and as plant communities change, a specialist can be left with fewer options. A generalist that eats many kinds of food may cope better during change. Paraceratherium was a specialist. Its teeth and skull and neck all point to a life reaching up to trees. When the trees became fewer in the right places, the giant lost its advantage. There is a deeper human connection in the history of its discovery. Think about how many people across how many countries touched this story. A British officer in 1846 in the Dera Bugti hills in Balochistan saw something strange and passed it forward. Guy Ellcock Pilgrim led expeditions and named Acaratherium bugtiense. Clive Forster-Cooper studied the bones and named Paraceratherium. Aleksei Borissiak described an almost complete skeleton without a skull near the Aral Sea in Kazakhstan and called it Indricotherium. Chapman Andrews and Walter Granger stood in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia next to legs that had stayed upright in the ground for millions of years. The American Museum of Natural History supported that work. Decades later, Spencer Lucas and J. Sobus reviewed the tangle of names and made the case for using Paraceratherium as the umbrella genus. Donald Prothero explored the ecology and the competitive pressure from early elephants. In the Linxia region of Gansu, Tao Deng and colleagues described Paraceratherium linxiense and gave us a new skull to study. Each person added a piece. Each place revealed a layer of the story. The result is not just a skeleton in a museum hall, it is also a map of human curiosity, stretching from Pakistan to Mongolia to China to Central Asia and into Europe. There is also the movement of the animals themselves to consider. In the Oligocene, the Himalayan mountains and the Tibetan plateau were not as high as they are now. The lower relief allowed animals to move more easily between regions. Paraceratherium could have roamed across a home range that covered thousands of square kilometers. Fossils in Romania, Bulgaria, and Georgia suggest that the range reached into southeastern Europe. Fossils in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan show a strong presence in Central Asia. Sites in China and Mongolia reveal eastern ranges. When you see those dots on a map, the spread looks wide. That spread was possible because the environment offered bands of woodland and shrubby areas across that space. Where food routes crossed, Paraceratherium could go. What did Paraceratherium look like in life beyond the bones? Skin does not fossilize here, so we must be careful. Based on size and climate, a thick, mostly hairless hide is likely much like rhinoceroses or elephants today. Some hair on calves is possible, as many mammals have more hair when young. The ears may have been larger than in modern rhinos to help with heat, but we cannot be certain. The overall profile would show the highest point at the shoulders, a long neck, a long head with a strong, flexible upper lip or a short trunk, no horn, and a body that narrowed toward the hips. The tail would be short. The legs would look like columns with 3 broad toes. The animal would carry itself steadily. It would browse, pause, chew, and move on. Behavior leaves fewer marks, but we can compare with modern, large herbivores. Paraceratherium likely traveled to water each day, especially in dry seasons. It may have walked long distances at a steady pace rather than trotted or ran. If threatened, adults could face predators with their size. Young ones would need to stay near adults. Males may have fought with head and neck swings, as giraffes do, but the skull shapes of Paraceratherium suggest less of that and more display and posturing. There may have been vocal communication, but without soft tissue around the larynx, we cannot reconstruct its calls. In a sparse woodland with gentle slopes, the sound of branches breaking and leaves falling would mark the passing of a group. The evolution toward that form did not happen all at once. In the Eocene, earlier members of the rhinoceros family included small, fast runners known as hyracoodonts. They were dog-sized or pony-sized and lived very different lives. In Mongolia and China, the fossil record shows a stepwise trend. Juxia, about the size of a horse, shows some features that later appear in Paraceratherium. Urtinotherium was larger, closer to the size of a modern rhinoceros, and points the way toward the giant. Over millions of years, selection favored taller bodies that could reach higher leaves and larger digestive systems that could process large amounts of low-calorie plant matter. As climates cooled and forests opened into woodlands, being tall paid off. A bigger body also holds heat better during cool nights and can travel farther to find patches of trees. Each of these small advantages adds up when they last for millions of years. There are still open questions. How many species of Paraceratherium were there? Spencer Lucas and J. Sobus recognized 4 valid species. Later work, including new finds from China by Tao Deng and others, suggests there may be up to 6. Sorting that out requires careful comparison of skulls, jaws, and teeth, along with limb proportions, across a wide region. Scientists also ask how far north and south these animals traveled and whether they moved with the seasons. Isotopes can help, but more samples from more places are needed. Another question is how Paraceratherium interacted with early elephants and ruminants. Did they overlap widely in time and space, or did Paraceratherium fade out in some regions before early elephants arrived in large numbers? More precise dating of fossil layers will help. When you place Paraceratherium into the broader pattern of life, you see a wave. First, there is a rise. In the late Eocene and early Oligocene, large high browsers gain ground as woodlands spread. Paraceratherium reaches great size and ranges widely. Then there is a plateau where the animal holds its place for millions of years. Finally, there is a fall as climates cool, grasslands expand, and other herbivores diversify. The wave is slow, but it is real. The end of Paraceratherium marks the end of the largest body size on land for mammals. No later land mammal becomes taller. Some elephants later become very heavy, but the shape of the world never again offers the exact mix of food and space that made Paraceratherium possible. There is one more human side to this. In museums, artists and scientists build life-size models and skeletal mounts. A person can stand under a model of Paraceratherium and feel what it means to be very small. The mind imagines a peaceful browser moving between clumps of trees, pulling down branches with a strong lip and chewing slowly. There is no need to make the animal a monster. It does not roar or chase. It simply lives a life that fits its body and its world. That is the lesson of many prehistoric creatures. They were ordinary in their own time. They did ordinary things like eating, walking, caring for young, and resting. The scale makes them extraordinary to us. The discovery story also reveals how science works. Names change, new bones shift ideas. People argue and then agree. In the early years, labels like Paraceratherium, Indricotherium, Balochistherium, and Dzungariottherium were applied to similar bones in different places. Over time, with more comparisons and better communication, scientists decided to keep Paraceratherium as the genus. That does not erase the other names from history. They remain as markers of a time when teams worked separately across a vast region. The names also show respect for places. Balochistherium carries the memory of Balochistan. Indricotherium carries a Russian myth. Dzungariotherum carries Dzungaria. All point back to landscapes and languages. As you think about the end of this story, consider what happens when the climate changes. Paraceratherium thrived when woodlands were common and when open space let it move between patches of trees. When grasslands spread, the giant lost ground. It could not switch to grass without a major change in teeth and digestive system. It could not breed faster to keep up with losses. It could not find more forest by climbing higher ridges because the rising Himalayan mountains and Tibetan plateau changed wind and rain patterns and made some roots harder. A slow drip of change can be as strong as a sudden event. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the slow drip reshaped Asia. The final picture is not tragic or heroic. It is natural. Paraceratherium is an example of how life fills a niche when the niche exists and then withdraws when the niche closes. It is also an example of how pieces of a past world survive in stone. A tooth in Pakistan, a skull in Mongolia, a leg bone in Kazakhstan, a skull in the Linxia region in Gansu, China. Each piece adds to the whole. Each piece invites questions. What did the lips look like? How many hours did it rest in the shade? How far did it walk in a day? The answers may never be perfect, but the search itself is satisfying. Look again at the names and places that weave this story together, because names and places are anchors. Dera Bugti in Balochistan, the Aral Sea in Kazakhstan, the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, the Linxia region in Gansu, China, Kazakhstan and Tajikistan in Central Asia, Romania, Bulgaria and Georgia in southeastern Europe, Turkey and the Caucasus as bridges. Guy Ellcock Pilgrim, who first named Aceratherium bugtiense. Clive Forster-Cooper, who recognized the new genus and named Paraceratherium. Aleksei Borissiak, who named Indricotherium. Roy Chapman Andrews and Walter Granger of the American Museum of Natural History, who brought back the famous skull and found the upright legs. Spencer Lucas and J. Sobus, who reviewed the tangle of names. Tao Deng, who described Paraceratherium linxianse. Donald Prothero, who argued for the ecological pressure from elephant relatives. Hyenodon gigas and the entelodonts as threats to the young. Juxia and Urtinotherium as steps on the path. Paleoloxodon as a possible rival in mass. The Himalayan mountains and the Tibetan plateau as rising forces in the background. Each is a thread. Together they make the fabric. So what does this mean for you now? It suggests that big questions often live at the edge of simple facts. A tooth the size of a fist tells you about diet. A femur almost 5 feet long tells you about height. A wide nasal opening tells you about a lip or a trunk. Many such facts come together to tell a larger story about climate, movement and change. It also suggests that there is value in slow, careful work. The picture of Paraceratherium did not snap into focus in 1 year or even 1 decade. It has taken more than a century of field seasons, lab studies and revisions. New discoveries still arrive and still adjust the outline. There is one last question that closes the loop that opened at the start. How did a 20-ton, hornless rhino cousin rise to rule its world, and why did it vanish? It rose because the Oligocene offered open woodlands full of high leaves with few other creatures tall enough to eat them. It rose because being tall and heavy protected adults from most predators. It rose because long legs and a long neck let it reach where others could not. It vanished because the world cooled, grasslands spread, and new herbivores crowded the woodlands and changed them. It vanished because a body plan that depends on high leaves struggles in a land of grass. It vanished because slow reproduction makes recovery from long, slow stress very hard. In the end, Paraceratherium is more than a list of measurements. It is a chapter in the story of life where mammals explored the upper limits of size on land. It shows what is possible when climate and plants and geography create the right mix. It shows how quickly that possibility can close when the mix changes. It leaves behind questions that keep scientists and students alert, and it leaves behind a trail that anyone can follow from museum to museum and from book to book. That trail leads across Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, China, Tajikistan, Romania, Bulgaria, Georgia, Turkey, and the Caucasus. It leads through the work of Guy Ellcock Pilgrim, Clive Forster-Cooper, Aleksei Borissiak, Roy Chapman Andrews, Walter Granger, Spencer Lucas, J. Sobus, Tao Deng, and Donald Prothero. It leads through the names Paraceratherium, Indricotherium, Balochistan, and Dzungariatherium. And it leads to a final scene in a quiet woodland long ago where a giant reached up, drew down a branch with a strong upper lip, chewed, swallowed, and moved on.